Since September, we have been exploring each month a different one of the 12 qualities of spiritual maturity outlined by humanist luminary and Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Dr. Kendall Gibbons. And today is April 2nd, which means it's a new month and a new quality for us to explore together. So this month's quality of spiritual maturity is the capacity to be in the presence of pain without panic. It is our chance to reflect on the inevitability of pain and suffering in this life, and on our capacity in the face of our pain and the pain of others, not to flee, but to retain the mindfulness and presence that can sometimes, after a long, hard slog, see us through suffering to the wisdom and even growth that our experiences might hold. So it was poetic when yesterday morning I woke up ready to finish my first sermon of the month on pain, and I turned over in bed and I found myself immediately in excruciating pain. My upper back was locked up in that special way that can only result from hours of wrangling a particularly flaily and squirmy toddler that wants to be held and put down in equal measure. For the first hour of the day, I could not turn my neck to the right. I couldn't stand up straight. I really couldn't function. It was as if my body was telling me, "You're going to wax on about pain, huh? Be sure you remember how much it sucks." So let me pause now and say this. I don't believe that physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual pains are a gift or a part of some perfect plan. I don't believe they are a punishment or a test of faith. Pain is our body's physiological warning system of harm, and pain hurts. But I do believe that pain, like everything in this life, can teach us something. I believe it is a part of the terrible, beautiful paradox of living as humans in bodies. And I believe that we have unfathomable and miraculous capacity to survive it, and sometimes even to transform it into deep compassion, empathy, and wisdom. I also believe we often make pain worse when we flee it or panic. Worse for ourselves and worse for others. So yesterday morning, after I had taken some Aleve and alternated ice and heat and rolled around on a tennis ball while screaming in pain, I was ready to sit gingerly before my computer, and I was chastened by this relatively small reminder of the awful reality of pain. But I also had a few new things to say about tension and release and the unpleasant necessity of discomfort. Knotted muscles are a good example and metaphor for the need we often find to lean in order to find release. You cannot flee or ignore a knotted muscle. It has to be worked out, painfully through kneading, pummeling, massaging, whatever works. Painfully through discomfort, a new muscular state is eventually reached, but it hurts to get there. It is not always the case, but sometimes our discomfort is a signal of our transformation. This is true for many different kinds of discomfort. For physical discomfort, for cognitive dissonance in the brain, for emotional discomfort, for spiritual discomfort. And it is true from the very beginning of life. When my daughter Nora was first born, I was given a book called The Wonder Weeks, which talks about the predictable periods of fussiness and discomfort that infants and toddlers and children all go through in their first years. These periods are predictable because they are necessary, because they are an integral part of development. Each one is brought on by vast neural and cognitive changes that are part and parcel of learning how to be human in the world. So the book outlines how regular, fussy, uncomfortable periods are a predictor of incredible developmental leaps for children. That when they are out of sorts, they're about to be able to do something totally new. And so let me tell you, that is quite helpful as a parent wrangling a flailing toddler who wants to be held and put down at the same time, to know that this discomfort, this fussiness, has a purpose. This is something that I can read as a signal of something new. The book actually has a web application where you can enter your child's birth date and they will send you a Wonder Week alert. Warning, is your child unusually fussy? Here are all the cool things they're about to be able to do. And what a relief it is to read those alerts. That's what's happening. Growing up is hard and uncomfortable, and sometimes it hurts in a lot of different ways. And darned if it doesn't end, if it doesn't continue beyond toddlerhood and childhood. It doesn't end when we reach adulthood. I get unusually fussy when learning something new and challenging the perceptions that I have of myself and my world. And so here is a central point. Not all pain leads to growth, but all growth involves some measure of pain. And the more I think about knotted muscles and fussy babies, the more I realize that I have never experienced spiritual growth without profound spiritual discomfort as well. I have grown from the discomfort of questioning my most deeply held beliefs. And I have grown in spirit from the challenge of being truly present to death and people who are dying. And I have grown from the pain of recognizing my complicity in systems of oppression. These have all been fussy periods that have preceded something important and rich and real in my spiritual life. And so the exquisite risk of living authentically in this world is the risk of terrifying vulnerability and unrelenting presence to life which is painful and joyful and everything in between. But the result of that risk is spiritual maturity, and the reward is life lived whole. This week, I've been experiencing some emotional and spiritual discomfort in relation to challenges facing our denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association, which has been in the midst for the past several weeks of a controversy around hiring practices that is the latest instance in our long struggle to live up to our values, to grapple with the legacies of racism in our systems and psyches. A brave leader of color in our denomination has lifted up her experience of racial discrimination in hiring practices in our association. And it has signaled something of a crisis to our association because of the institutional response, which was at first deeply defensive. A deeply defensive reaction from institutional leaders that abdicated responsibility for causing pain and thus caused further harm to the leaders of color. It sprung in its heart from a desire to avoid the pain of recognizing what it is to fail to live up to our highest aspirations and callings. And so throughout our small Unitarian Universalist world, there has been a widespread outcry over the course of the last weeks at this harm, and a demand to take those charges seriously and to grapple with our pain and our discomfort with systemic racism and sexism and ableism and the other oppressions that live in our systems and in our psyches. And this rippled through our association until Thursday, when the president of our association, the Reverend Peter Morales, resigned with 3 months left in his term. So there's a lot of pain in our association right now. And I'm saddened for Reverend Morales. And I'm disappointed by his decision to resign, rather than to stay and show us what it is for a leader to lean in to the pain of failure and critique, to show us what it is to transform defensiveness and discomfort into new openness and growth, to show us how we can work through the pain of not living up to our highest aspirations and recommit ourselves to those priorities. I also fear his departure will hurry the painful conversation to closure and to an end, so that the discomfort of the rest of the leadership team and the rest of the association may be put to rest instead of grappling and working through that discomfort. And so I've been reflecting and learning with these events, feeling sad and disappointed and frustrated and implicated and complicit and all of those things. And I've been reflecting that our pain, born of failure to reach our highest intent, that pain can do harm to others if we refuse to own it, if we flee from it ourselves. My colleague, the Reverend Darcy Baxter, wrote about this struggle of our association, saying, "This stuff is deep, messy, risky, and painful for all involved, though not at all equally so for everyone." Because that's what oppression does, right? Oppression disproportionately distributes pain and risk to brown, black, queer, women, and poorer folks. Oppression disproportionately distributes pain and risk. So for those in the dominant culture, and I'm going to use the pronoun we here in order to include myself, for those in the dominant culture unaccustomed to the pain of injustice in its most excruciating forms, the discomfort of facing such injustice can feel extreme. It threatens what we thought we knew of the world and our own good intentions, and so we flee in self-defense from the pain of causing harm. We deny the impact of our actions, or we say they're just exaggerating. But the problem is, our comfort comes at the expense of other people's lives and well-being and livelihoods. Systems of power and privilege distribute risk and pain to those already most oppressed by the systems. And they allow members of the dominant culture to avoid discomfort at the cost of intense pain and deep risk on the lives of those already more marginalized. This would be anathema to the calling of our faith in and of itself. We know that our comfort is not more important than people's lives. But here's a further point, as we recall our connection to one another, that perhaps those privileges that allow us to escape pain and discomfort, perhaps the privileges that allow those in the dominant culture to escape pain and discomfort actually stunt our spiritual growth. Perhaps it is only by leaning into the pain of our separation the pain of our participation in oppression, that we will ever find ourselves able to open to the world of flourishing and liberation that we so desperately desire to be a part of. And of course, it is beyond time for us to take up the piece of the risk and pain that is disproportionately visited upon others. It is time to pound out the knots of fear and perfectionism in our spiritual muscles, that we might find ourselves looser and more flexible, more connected to our neighbors, and to love itself. And so, not coincidentally, next week we will be voting about whether to declare ourselves a sanctuary congregation. This would be an act of open resistance to current policies and rhetorics of xenophobia and dehumanization of migrant peoples. It would mean taking a very public stance on behalf of our belief in the dignity and fair treatment of all people and the sanctity of the lives of migrant individuals. It would mean being willing to allow a person facing detention to live in our church for an undetermined period of time as a legal strategy for pursuing a stay of deportation. This work would be supported by a large network of local people of faith with their volunteer time and resources. And it will be a small act for us of concrete faith, something we can do about the ache, involving some risk and a lot of unknown, unanswered questions. But I deeply believe it is one action we are called by our faith to take in this time. It will be uncomfortable and inconvenient, and it's about time for us to reclaim for ourselves as a majority white citizen community some small part of the risk and discomfort and pain that is disproportionately transferred into the lives of immigrants and people of color and refugees and others in our society. Not only that, but this discomfort is an opportunity for our spiritual growth. I believe acting in this way, in this small, concrete way, will give us gifts more than anything. Will give us courage and hope and newly strengthened spiritual muscle. If you've not yet attended a discernment conversation about this work, I hope you will join me and our sanctuary team members at one of the two remaining conversations this afternoon from 12:30 to 2:30 here in the sanctuary, or tomorrow evening from 6 to 8 p.m. If you have questions, if you need to learn more in order to grapple with this discomfort, please come to one of those meetings or contact me so that we can find our courage and strength in the work that lies ahead of us. Our vote will be between our two services on Sunday, April 9th, next week. Through these discernment conversations, I've heard a deep sense of calling and faith. And I've also heard and felt discomfort with several aspects of the work, all of which is entirely understandable. Feelings of discomfort and calling and faith can and do so often share space in the heart. It's not wrong to feel uncomfortable with the idea of sharing our space, which is in high demand. It's not wrong to feel uncomfortable with the fact that our church basement is not an ideal living space to offer, and we have high standards of hospitality. It's not wrong to feel uncomfortable with the notoriety of such an open act of resistance and solidarity, and with the risk of attracting unwanted hateful attention. It's not wrong to feel uncomfortable with the many questions that will only be answered by walking down the path of sanctuary. Our discomforts and doubts are not wrong. And it is time to own what is ours to own. our share of the exquisite risk. Not even our share, some small portion of our share. And it is deeply right to remember that our discomfort is almost always a profound invitation to spiritual growth. It is deeply right to remember that facing our discomfort in a majority white citizen congregation is an unavoidable step on the road to justice, as we claim the pain that is ours to wrestle, rather than refusing it and sending it back upon communities more vulnerable. Taking this worldly risk together, and then imagining even more, can be the pathway toward that exquisite risk of life lived whole. This work, and imagining other pieces of work like it, can be one answer to the aching in our chests, leaning into the pain of separation from our human kin. It can be a stretching of our hearts, a quickening of spiritual muscle, and a growing strength. It can be one uncomfortable, gorgeous awakening of our senses to experience the call of compassion, to feel the deep power of connection that is possible, and to keep at last the promise of love. I hope we can join together in this work of exquisite risk in the days to come.